Alrighty, well, why don't we get started? Thank you all for joining us tonight for the webinar, Healthy Land, Healthy Lake. My name is Caitlin Fellow. I'm the director of the Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association. This week, the world celebrated World Water Day on March 22nd, and World Water Day is less of a celebration, but more of an acknowledgement to the issue of water scarcity across the globe. Over 10% of the world's population live with the daily struggle of finding clean, safe water for themselves, also their families, their livestock, crops, and their constituents. For us here in the Finger Lakes, though, these issues don't necessarily apply, but World Water Day is also a reminder of the reality that we who reside in the Finger Lakes have an obligation to ourselves and to future residents to be stewards of our lake and the freshwater resource that we so fortunately have consistent use of. So as we are all by now aware, our daily practices in the watershed and on the land surrounding Seneca Lake can have a major impact on water quality. So in tonight's webinar, we're focusing on practices that individuals can adopt in their gardens, lawns, and elsewhere that continue to beautify our landscape while also protecting our freshwater resource, Seneca Lake. So you can go to the next slide. So with that, I'll introduce our two experts tonight. Caroline Budard Hunt is the agricultural and horticultural educator at Cornell Cooperative Extension of Yates County. Prior to working for CCE Yates, Caroline and her husband Jonathan ran an organic vegetable CSA. Caroline loves sharing her interest in gardening through workshops, her work with the Yates County Master Gardeners, and answering gardening questions. Then we'll hear from Heather Gilbert, owner of the Finger Lakes Compost. She is a local permaculture homesteader living with her two daughters. She is also an environmentalist who enjoys community outreach, education, and playing in the dirt. She's passionate about keeping the Finger Lakes region clean, healthy, and beautiful. So just a few reminders, if you get to the next slide. For tonight, I think there's not too many of us tonight, so although we do ask that you remain muted, it's not necessary that you keep your video off. I think that's fine that everybody is how they currently are situated. If you have questions, please ask them in the chat box, and we'll answer those questions at the end of the webinar, at the end of both presentations for both presenters. So you can take it away, Caroline.
Well, thank you very much, Caitlin, for that lovely introduction. I am so excited to be here to present to you today. Today, I'm going to be talking about growing green, lawns and ground covers. And, a lot of people go, well, it's my lawn. Why does it matter that much? And, I just put a little stuff on it, but how we manage our lawns really matters. There are over 2.8 million acres of lawn within New York State. And to put that in perspective, currently, there are 4.6 million acres of actively farmed land in New York State. So really, lawns can have a huge impact on the environment, just the same way farmland can. And that's why farmers are very aware of how they treat their land. Landowners do need that as well with lawns. Over 900,000 acres are managed by private homeowners as well. And the New York DEC estimates that grass clippings make up over nearly 10% of the waste that homeowners dispose of in landfills, which is a huge chunk of material that can be composted. So we'll get to that later. However, with all these things about lawns, and I know, every 3 or 4 times a year, I read an article about tear up your lawn, no lawns, but a well-managed lawn can be an environmental asset. So we're going to talk about how to best manage your lawn to protect water quality, prevent erosion, and having a beautiful, place that you can spend time outside. So step 1 is knowing your lawn. There are 2 types of grass that we really deal with in this country, and there are 2 kind of categories. There is cool season grass and warm season grass. Us in the north, we really can't do the warm season grass, where summers are not hot enough to help their growth. So we have cool season grasses, and what you can see here is just a quick idea of how they grow during the season. So right now, if you were to dig up your grass, you're going to see a lot of new roots forming. This is the time they're starting to put out new shoots and really building that root mass. And these will continue to actively grow through the spring when the temperatures get a little hotter. and the season gets a little drier, they will slow growth. And in really hot, dry years, like 2 years ago, they'll even go dormant to protect themselves in the warmer temperatures. When the fall comes, August, early September, that growth starts up again. We get more root growth and more shoot growth again. And that will the root growth will continue until the soil freezes. And that's important on how we manage this grass. So one thing, because we have that flush of new growth in the spring, it's really tempting to mow low. So we don't have to mow as often. It looks nice and neat. People get very concerned about their neighbors feeling like their lawns are out of control. And I'm going to say that this is a hard sell. I've talked about this in my Master Gardeners group, and I have had nobody take me up on trying this. So these are people who care about the environment, who I enjoy working with, who plant native plants and are very interested in green growing. But it's very hard to give up that idea of a short lawn because it just looks so nice and neat. However, grass will grow better and your grass will look better, believe it or not, if you do not mow lower than 3 inches. And we have to think about grass, it's a plant. When that grass blade is where the energy of the plant comes from. It can't build good roots and it can't protect itself against insects and diseases if it doesn't have that space to photosynthesize. Also, when you mow short, you expose the crown, you expose more of the soil, and that can definitely make spaces for weeds to germinate. So this is really the most important step to take with turf and probably the least done. In fact, I went to a talk once at a golf course and the golf course manager said, everybody loves to come and see our golf courses and how green they are. However, in my home lawn, I keep my lawn 4 inches. He's like, I have no issues with diseases. I have no issues with grubs because the taller grass can really outcompete most other problems. So what does 3 inches really look like? It really can look very nice and neat. So just showing an example here, cut A is at about 1 1/4 inches. So you can see that brown, that's where we're seeing the crown, and there's very little of that green active growing foliage. While cut B, that's at 3 inches. So you really see that nice green. So it can look very neat. And then to the left is uncut. Taller grass means fewer weeds. Grass can outcompete even really aggressive weeds like crabgrass if they can prevent the seeds from germinating. So having that taller grass prevents germination of weed seeds and can outcompete them. The other management tip that's really important is to mow frequently. And I know I just told you not to mow very much. And now I'm telling you to go out there more. But the goal with mowing is that you should only take off 1/3 of that blade at any given time. What that does is it prevents the plant from going into shock. It means it's going to keep growing. Grasses have evolved to be grazed on. And so light mowing stimulates their growth and they can outgrow any damage very quickly. This may mean when we get into real spring weather, you're mowing every 5 days in the spring, which I know is a lot. But once we move into summer and that grass begins to go dormant and into its resting phase, you can mow much less frequently, maybe even once every other week. If signs you've mowed a little too long is if you're getting a lot of grass clumps when you're mowing and having to deal with those, that's a sign that you waited too long or you mowed when it was too wet out. Another important thing with mowing, and this is the perfect time to deal with it, is to take your blades in to get sharpened. We have a lot of places in our counties that we can bring blades into your local hardware store and get them sharpened. And why do we want to do that? Well, you can see this picture down below, the difference between the cuts. When a blade is dull, it tears grass instead of cutting cleanly. It's kind of like shaving with a dull razor. That's not the most pleasant experience. So you can get a nice clean cut with a sharp blade. Clean cuts heal much quicker. And so that can really prevent fungal diseases from getting into your plant. They're also more attractive and you don't get those brown tips. Your lawn doesn't look frosted after you cut. And your mowing is more efficient. So they recommend sharpening your blades, I think every 10 to 20 hours, which sounds like very frequently, but if it takes an hour to mow your lawn, that's 10 to 20 times you can mow it before you have to sharpen those blades. But if you start to notice a lot of fraying in your cuts, that's a sign you should take your blades in. Now, when we're talking about mowing, I can't ignore those grass clippings. We talked about how up to 10% of the waste going into landfills is grass clippings. That is beautiful nitrogen for your lawn. That growth is nice and soft because you've been cutting it just a third of it, a third of it at a time. So it's short pieces. Those break down very quickly into water, nitrogen, and other nutrients for your plants. And that breakdown process also helps support microbial growth in your lawn, which is great for soil health. By just mowing and leaving your grass clippings, you can add 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, which is about half of what you want to apply in the year. So you can really reduce your fertilization by doing that as well. And it's much easier. And contrary, some people get very concerned about grass clippings causing thatching. They really don't cause thatching. Thatching is caused by over-fertilization, over-watering. When we have, really wet soils and soil compaction, that growth can build up and you can build that thatch layer. That's for a whole nother discussion. But leaving your grass clippings will not cause thatching. The other thing we just mentioned soil briefly. It's really important to test your soil. Lawns grow best at a pH between 6 and 7. That is the acidity or alkalinity of your soil, and it affects how a plant can absorb nutrients. Now, I'm just going to put this out here really quickly. CC Yates County does free pH testing. All you're going to do is bring in a teaspoon of soil and we can check that for you very quickly. It's important to do if you're also noticing a lot of problems in your lawn and you think you have an issue with fertility, it's important to test before you apply fertilizer to see what you're missing. So we can send away samples to here so you can get a full soil test and we can go over the results with you. And when you're doing that, I always recommend testing the best part of your lawn and the worst part of your lawn and getting both of those checked so you can compare the results. And you may find that the nutrient levels are the same in the both, and there's something else going on like compaction. Maybe you need to aerate. So it may not just be fertilizer. Another quick way you can check, kind of just do a quick check on your lawn is learn from the weeds you're getting. I have some areas which are really, really wet. And I've got a lot of creeping Jenny in those spots, and I can identify where I've wet spots in my lawn by that. You can see prostate knotweed up here and plantain, which we all know grow best in really compacted soil. Crabgrass, I'm sure if you have any land near a curb where there's salt applied, that is where you're going to get your crabgrass because it's extremely salt tolerant compared to your grass. Ground ivy thrives when grass is cut really short. It really likes that extra light. Crabgrass as well. Those can both grow and flower and seed lower than your grass can tolerate living. So crabgrass can grow and go to seed at just a ½ an inch tall. So you'll never outcut the crabgrass. You may, but you can outcut your own lawn. Fertilizing tips. We recommend fertilizing in September. Don't fertilize after the first real frost, but September is a really perfect time because we're getting that root growth. So what fertilizing does is it provides those minerals and nutrients to your plants so they can support the top growth. Do not use a lawn fertilizer that contains phosphorus. It is against the law, first off, to apply phosphorus to a home lawn that you have not done a soil test on to show that you need phosphorus because of the risk to the lakes. And the only time that there's an exception to that is if you're establishing a new lawn, because phosphorus is a very important nutrient for lawn root growth. But we recommend for a good lawn, just a really pretty nice, comfortable lawn that you can walk on, you really only need to apply fertilizer once in September. If you really have a lawn that gets a lot of traffic and use, maybe a second time just to give it that little extra oomph to recover. And if you're mulching the clippings, obviously you need less, especially nitrogen fertilizer. So as I said, there's a lawn fertilizer law out there. So do not use lawn fertilizer that contains phosphorus. Don't apply any lawn fertilizer on surfaces such as sidewalks or driveways. And if you spill any on those surfaces, you must contain the spill to prevent runoff into drains and waterways. And you also should not apply lawn fertilizer within 20 feet of any surface water, including with a sprayer. So be careful of that if you're located along the lake. And this is where those grass clippings also come in handy. You've cut your need for fertilizer. Another really good practice, and that this can help prevent weeds in your lawn, is spot repairing. This time of year is a great time of year to start to spot repair. Nature abhors a vacuum. Your lawn, if you've got a gap in it, something is going to germinate and is probably not what you want to germinate, unless you like dandelions, which, you know, can be quite pretty. So this is just where you go by and repair the bare spots in the spring. Try to choose a grass seed that matches the area. If you have a lot of bare spots because it's, you know, where you're walking down to the lake, or maybe it's where your dog is peeing, we'll talk about some options for that. Try to get a grass that's going to tolerate those conditions better. And I always recommend putting a light layer of straw over the spot to prevent rain erosion so your seed doesn't wash off when we get these stronger rainstorms. Cutting tall and these management techniques can also help against insects and diseases. There are some other really great prevention techniques that we can use to prevent damage. It's important to scout if you start to notice bald spots in your lawn. If you have a skunk going in your lawn and digging, or you see a lot of birds, that's where you should go and dig up and look under your sod to see if you have grubs. There are things we can do for grubs. There are beneficial nematodes. There's Heterorhabditis bacteriophora. This is a beneficial nematode that's really good for grubs like Japanese beetles, root weevils. And you can apply that, spray that right on your lawn on a cloudy day. And they're quite long-lived and they can live in your lawn and help suppress pests to below a level where they cause obvious damage. You can also plant endophytic grass varieties. These can help the plant resist insects that feed above the ground. For diseases, don't water at night. Wet leaves are a recipe for fungal diseases, as we all saw last summer when we all had fungal diseases all over our garden. Don't over-fertilize. High nitrogen can increase susceptibility to disease. Choosing disease-resistant varieties. If you're continuing to have a problem, there are a lot of disease-resistant grass varieties out there to choose from, and try to pick something that will help against the disease you have the most trouble with. Keeping your blades sharp and improving drainage are also important. There are a multitude of grasses out there, and there's usually a grass for the right place as long as you've got about 4 hours of good sunlight a day. Marginal light conditions you can get by with a nice fescue. High traffic areas, you want to go for bluegrass or ryegrass. If you've got a dog that uses your yard a lot, because I've got a dog that my son walks in the same place every day, and I'm going for a tall fescue and perennial ryegrass this year to patch. So I just challenge you to try this out in 2022. Even if you're somebody who usually cuts your lawn 2 inches, 2.5 inches short, just try raising it up an inch. Mow high and frequently. See what you think of it. If you can tolerate it, see what it looks like midsummer. I can guarantee you your lawn is going to stay greener longer into the summer when it's a little taller, and you're going to have fewer large-scale issues. Patch your small holes early to prevent that weed incursions. Fertilize your lawn in the fall if needed, and don't water regularly. Finally, with this area, I want to just bring up one other option. You know, as opposed to fighting the weeds, go for a bee lawn. It's a really beautiful thing. And if the whole lawn is like this, it can be quite a wonderful habitat for pollinators. You can still mow it, but you mow it higher, so you end up mowing about every other week. You have beautiful flowers. It's more climate adaptive. It can deal with drought. It can deal with excess rain. And you'll use less fuel and fertilizer to maintain it. And this is a whole nother workshop that I will cover at another point if anyone's interested. But this is a really wonderful way to also have a lawn. Another thing is, if you have areas that grass is really just not growing, consider ground covers for that area. We have some beautiful native ground covers. And I prefer natives because you get more ecological services. You have more insects that can utilize them for food and shelter, and birds, which just increases interest in your yard. And they're really well adapted to our growing conditions. And some of these, I'm going to be a little controversial here and suggest some that are slightly southern of us, because as our climate changes, the plants in our area, we may have better luck with some of the slightly southern native plants of our country. I know they're not true natives to New York State, but a Pennsylvania plant that is a zone 7 may do better in Penn Yan in 10 years than a zone 6 plant would. So it's just something to think about. These can be really attractive and low maintenance. For example, this is one of my favorites. This is Allegheny pachysandra. This is a beautiful, low growing, dry shade plant that in those areas where you have grass that just will not settle. This is a beautiful plant you could plant instead. The foliage develops silver mottling in the fall. It has fragrant flowers in the spring, and it's semi-evergreen, and it needs really very little care. For slopes, especially where you have compacted wet soil, Anemone canadensis, Canadian anemone is a beautiful plant. This is a really aggressive plant. So put it somewhere where you really want a whole bunch of it. You can keep it in place with a little bit of metal around the outside edging, but it will spread rapidly and fill in. So I think it's a really great solution on a slope where you don't want to mow. It's deer and rabbit resistant, flowers, very attractive pollinators, and salt tolerant. Green and gold, this is another beautiful plant. It forms a rapidly spreading mat, but it's not excessively aggressive. Full shade to partial shade with a long bloom time. It starts in May and will flower semi-regularly through October. It's very attractive to bees and butterflies, and the seeds are a very good food source for songbirds. And finally, haze-scented fern. This is a beautiful, beautiful fern that will grow in dry shade. And what I love with ferns is it really can make that, if you've got woods and then you've got grass and you've got a little area where nothing else grows, ferns can make it that look really beautiful and adds that kind of transition layer that's really nice. This tolerates salt. If you rub the leaves, it smells beautiful. It's deer and rabbit resistance and has beautiful fall color. So some quick planting tips and then I'm done. So begin with enough plants the first year for good first year impact. You want to plant things about 1 foot apart. So if you really want a good ground cover, water regularly the first year. Even drought tolerant plants need to settle their roots in. Be patient. So the first year, everything's going to kind of sit there. Second year is going to grow a little bit. And the third year, that's when you're going to really see the filling in. And also planting a variety of growth habits and heights to make it interesting. I love this slope here where they've done all these different plants because it's, they could have just done one thing and it would have been great. It would have been beautiful, but this is going to have multi-season interest and you'll always be looking at it. So, and just finally, we're here to help. My email address is here, cb239@cornell.edu. We do free soil tests at the office. We do free home visits within Yates County. If you have a question and need help or have a gardening, just need help even garden planting, we can come out and give you advice and do whatever we can. And we also do pest identification and management suggestions. So thank you very much. And now here we go with Heather's.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Your presentation was amazing. Bear with me, everybody. Mine's much more modest as I am truly the soul to soil. My main goal is to be in the dirt all the time. I'm going to touch base on a couple little subjects, but mostly I'm going to harbor over composting as that's my expertise. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Next slide. So I'm the owner and founder of Finger Lakes Compost. If you haven't heard, we are a local curbside subscription program where we provide food waste and other compostable material diversion from the landfill. We will bring you a bucket, you fill the bucket up, and we take it away and take care of it and bring it to our farm. And that is where we, break it down into compost soil. So compost soil is an amendment that is great for all gardening practices and farming practices. So just a little bit more about where we got started. My daughter started school right here in Dundee, and I was just a volunteering mom, and I realized the food waste just in the schools alone is incredible. It kind of blew my mind that even after they have a seconds table where you can put something you don't choose to eat that's still edible for another child. The waste is incredible that even just comes right out of the cafeteria that never even gets to the children's trays or the plates. So I just seen a need for that alone. And then being an avid gardener myself and composting in my backyard, I just seen that maybe this was something that we could bring to fruition here in the Finger Lakes, because I believe that the Finger Lakes has the culture of creating beautiful, beautiful waterways, beautiful land, beautiful air. So that's a little bit about me. I've done a lot of certifications to get to where I'm at. So if you have any compost questions, you can get a hold of me through Finger Lakes Compost Gmail. I have a website, and I'm also on all sorts of social medias. So my passion is grow it here, eat it here, compost it here, and repeat. I believe in keeping all soil amendments right here in the Finger Lakes for us. We are a huge agritourism place with the wineries, and we've built a really great industry here that I think is amazing. But I think that we could do some practices that would benefit all of us and continue for years down the road for our children and our children's children. Next slide. So these are the three topics I'm kind of going to touch on. Compost, of course, sustainable farm practices. So just a couple organic farm practices where we're not disrupting the soil as much. And then just kind of at the end, soil health. Could soil help save the planet? Next slide. So compost, what is compost? So composting is the action or the means of decomposition of organic materials such as yard waste, food waste, cardboard, paper. I think most of us know kind of what is a compostable type of material: no plastics, no metals, styrofoams, no. So it's the action of these materials breaking down and turning into a humus-rich material that is your compost. So that's considered an amendment. So you would add it to dirt or soil that you already have to bring in the nutrients that it would need to uplift that soil to be as vigorous as it can be. Why compost? Because it's a partial solution to an issue that we already have. We are ladled with landfills, especially around us here in the Finger Lakes region. They truck trash from the cities up here. So if there's just one small thing that we could do as individuals to attack that situation, is we could compost. And I think that if you take a look at your garbage, you can really dissect it and realize that there's probably about 40% compostable materials in your trash at any given time that you could essentially either, compost in your own backyard if you have the means of it. There's indoor composting, there's commercial composting. CCE is a great place to find resources. There's a CCE in every county, and they are a plethora of knowledge for all things compost, farming, gardening, soil. They provide a lot of workshops and classes. So if you want to dig deeper into composting, either reach out to me, reach out to Carolyn. Her husband also composts. So we're here for you. It's something that everybody can do, whether you need a subscription service or you want to just learn how to do it in your own backyard. So composting, I'll go in a little depth about what it is. There's no one size shoe fits all. Compost can be made up of many different materials. It could be manure, it could be mushroom substrate, it could be food waste. So like Carolyn had touched prior, you want to test your soil. So just like you would test your ground soil in your yard or on your farm, you would want to test your compost soil, because you don't know exactly the volumes of nitrogen, the phosphorus, the carbon, all the different things that could be in there. So your lawn may need certain things, or your farm, your field, whatever crop you're growing might need a certain thing, or if it's lacking and you need to put certain things, then you're really going to want to know what kind of compost amendment would work best. But with compost, pretty much one rule goes across the board is a 3-to-1 ratio. So you always want to do a 3-part brown, which is your carbon material. And that, of course, sounds like it sounds brown. That's your dry materials, your leaves, your branches, your twigs, your sawdust, Wood chips are amazing. And then your one part of green. So green is your grass clippings, your food waste. You know, if you're putting grass clippings, when they're green, they are a green material. As they dry out, they, you know, things become more of a brown material. So use your discretion if you're using yard trimmings and yard waste. But a 3-to-1 ratio is kind of the rule of thumb, always as you're composting. A lot of farmers, they have animal manure, and usually that's just mixed in with whatever medium they use for their bedding, whether it be wood shavings, hay, anything like that. So that's a lot more of a simple kind of composting concept. How to compost, like I said, you can compost in your backyard with a simple wire bin. You could also get a compost turner, which is something you can invest in, which keeps everything kind of contained if you're in town. If you live, you know, outside of town, and you can just kind of throw it out in the back lot, where it's not going to really bother anybody as long as you keep it kind of managed. Wild animals shouldn't be too big of a deal. But any way that you can compost, you're doing the best thing. It's sustainable. If you can do it on your own property, then you're creating a product for yourself that's very useful. So there's no reason not to compost. Next slide. Soil loves compost. So as we're talking about all of our lawn practices and our farming practices, the benefits of compost, what exactly are the benefits? So we know the nutrients, we know that it contains a lot of nutrients. It's considered black gold because it can amend the most depleted soil over time if you just keep working it. So compost contains the full spectrum of plant nutrients. Compost releases the nutrients slowly over several years, months, to make it more bioavailable to the plants so they can actually utilize it. Soil enriched with compost retains fertilizers. So if you were to put a synthetic fertilizer on there, it would retain it, and as opposed to soil that is not amended, it would be possibly more compacted, and that would create runoff. So if you're using spray fertilizers or even powdered or soil type fertilizers, you have to be very careful of the runoff if your soil is not absorbent and spongy. So that goes into soil structure. Soil structure is a huge deal. If our soil is hard and compacted, it's not going to absorb water like it's supposed to. The plants aren't going to be able to spread their roots like they're supposed to uptake the nutrients like they need to. So compost helps bind clusters of soil particles known as aggregates. And you can do tests for aggregates in your soil. You can go out and pick up your soil, which an aggregate is kind of like a balled up piece of soil. And you want your soil to be rich with aggregates. You want it to be full of air channels and pores. You want it to hold air and moisture and nutrients like a sponge. And compost incorporated into your garden soil or your farm soil will do that. Compost alters the texture of and the structure of the soil, increasing or decreasing erosion. So if it's spongy and it's full and not all dry and compacted, your soil's going to retain itself better. It's not going to erode with rain. It's not going to erode with wind. It's going to kind of just stay put where it needs to be. And also compost introduces and feeds diverse life in the soil. So that includes your bacteria, your fungus, your worms, your nematodes, all of that stuff that we need in the soil to create secretions and give us the support that the plants need. And that'll give us the vigorous plant growth we need. And then water quality. So here we are with pure waters. Water quality is huge around here. So compost increases the soil's ability to retain the water, as I mentioned before, and it decreases runoff. Runoff pollutes water by carrying soil and the fertilizers and the pesticides to any, close waterway. And as we know, Seneca Lake, we can all visualize that everything kind of runs downhill into Seneca Lake. Compost promotes healthy root growth and it's just an overall a good thing. So next slide. All right. So here's a picture just showing how farmers can apply compost to their fields. This way it can be spread out evenly in a thin layer, usually about 2 inches thick is good. Farmers' fields can handle coarser compost, and lawns would probably use a finer compost if you wanted to use that as a fertilizer instead of a synthetic fertilizer. Farmers are realizing that our soil is getting depleted and that it's not such a renewable resource if we don't manage it, and the compost will help make this a more humus and fix that deficit that we have. Next slide. So sustainable farming, I'm going to talk about 2 different practices to where we don't mess up the biology of the soil. It's a better way than plowing the soil. The first one is strip till farming. It's a tillage system that combines no-till and full tillage together. You produce rows and then you swap those rows and alternate them. The only thing with the no-till farming is if you are doing it on a large scale, it does require specific equipment. So I know that can be an investment, but if you're doing, just your gardening, it's a really good way to not mess up the structure of your soil. The primary reason for soil to degrade is because it's always being messed with. It needs to have basically like an organic glue, which is what your worms and your arthropods, bacteria and fungi create. So the no-till is probably one of the most organic ways to go as far as farming. So with the no-till farming, you would just drill your seed directly into the last crop that had finished off there at the end of the season. So your last crop residuals will be there. You would just drill your seed right through there. So that would be no-till farming. You wouldn't actually go through and plow your fields. Next slide. Next slide. Perfect. So healthy soil doesn't want to be disturbed. It wants to be covered perpetually. And remember that soil and plants are one. It's not a separate thing. The plant and the soil is one unit. This picture right here is a great picture to show tilled and not tilled. You can see that not tilled looks great. Everything looks spongy. The grass is vibrant. And then the tilled side, as you can see, it's compacted, it's crusty. There's a lot of erosion. There would be a lot of runoff if that's what your soil looks like. The low soil disturbance and high diversity mimics nature, and it promotes healthy cycles within the soil ecosystem. So the water cycle, the biocommunity cycle, and the nutrient cycle, which is all your ingredients in a perfect ecosystem in the soil, they diminish when we haul in synthetic fertilizers. A lot of them run out with the rainfall, or they never got absorbed in the first place. So you're messing with the water cycle, that will mess with the nutrient cycle and the entire biocommunity. So we don't really have so much of a runoff problem. We have a soil problem, which our soil isn't absorbing everything like it should. So it's an infiltration problem. A lot of times we're taught to create buffer systems. So like to prevent, leaking or runoff into the lake or the stream, we're taught to do buffer systems, which I think is great. And to touch base on Carolyn's presentation about native plants, you'd definitely want to do native plants. And I think buffer systems are great. But if the soil above the buffer system is depleted and no good, it's kind of like just putting a Band-Aid on there. So we really want to fix all soil and start from the root cause, because soil health is all health. Okay. All right. So I think climate change is on a lot of our minds, and especially as the younger generations are coming up, I feel like they're all really getting on board with sustainable practices. And I think it's between the temperature changes, I think with what we see with our lakes, how we have blooms and they're not always so pleasant to partake in swimming or fishing. I know that the fish in Seneca Lake has gone down since I've just moved here about 13 years ago. So it's a really big deal that we practice good soil habits, and that's using the right fertilizers. If we use them, that's disturbing the soil the least we can, that's using native plants and crops when we're planting, alternating our plants and our crops, because we don't want to create, it wouldn't happen so much here, but another dust bowl or something like that, where the soil is no good to us and we can't grow healthy food. We want to keep things good and healthy. Next slide. So here, this photo I got, there's not very many studies on no-till farming because it just hasn't been a huge practice. But they did do a study in UK, and they did find that, I think it was about roughly 30 years, that long-term no-tillage together with cover crops can significantly enhance soil carbon sequestration. Sorry about that. In the context of climate change. So carbon's huge. We want carbon to go in the soil and not going up. We want the plants to do what they need to do. So they're showing that this is something that works. The no-tilling, planting cover crops, planting native crops, alternating crops. So while any cover crop is better than bare soil, it is suggested that we always have a diversity, but we do select species such as rye, oats, wheat, radish, peas, clover, sunflowers, and interspersing strips of native perennial plants will contribute to a particular system that'll fit the natural ecosystem. So as you can see here with the corn, in between, it looks like it's probably just a grass or something like that, but it's not going to harm the corn at all. The corn's still going to grow vigorously, so it's fine. And we don't want to just throw seed out there. You want to do it cautiously. Everything we want to do, we want to think cautiously about the future. And every cover crop has a different chemical structure, so you want to make sure that you're doing what you need for your field. And again, Cornell's great. They work with farmers and testing. They do a lot of seed testing. You can always reach out to them if you're looking for a particular cover crop or some native crops or native plants. Next slide. All right, so could soil save the earth? Soil health is defined as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. The importance of managing soils so they are sustainable for future generations. 5 principles of soil health is soil armor, minimizing soil disturbance, plant diversity, continual life plant root livestock integration. So soil armor is basically just leaving your previous crop residuals, leaving them right there on the field. They create a wind and water barrier for erosion on the soil, evaporation rates slow down, soil temperature maintains, it lessens compaction, and then it suppresses weed growth, but it also helps create a little home for all the critters in there too. Minimizing soil disturbance, we already went over. The plant diversity, we went over too. The continual live plant root, basically our cropland systems usually grow either in a cool season or a warm season for our cash crops, which have a dormant period. And during that dormant period, we should do cover crops to fill in, to keep the live roots down under the soil, which is the primary food source for the soil food web. Cover crops can address a number of resource concerns. It can harvest CO2 and sunlight, providing the carbon to the soil food web, building soil aggregates and porous soil spaces, which improves soil infiltration, cover the soil, controlling wind and water erosion, soil temperature, and rainfall. I wanted to go back on talking about the soil aggregates and how you can kind of do an at-home test to see kind of where your soil status is to start with. If you go and find, as Carolyn said, the worst spot in your yard or your field soil and the best spot, and get 2, balls of dirt if you can, and dry them out and see what happens. If it completely crumbles and falls apart, there's a problem. There's no nutrients in there. You would want it to kind of hold its structure a little bit. So that's just a simple like at-home test. That's not going to tell you what's missing in your soil or things like that, but that would just kind of let you know what maybe additives you need to, how far depleted your soil is. I think that's about all that I have.
All right, so that was excellent.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather and Caroline. Those both presentations, terrific. I see a lot of questions are coming into the chat box, so I'm going to start kind of just reading them aloud so everybody's aware of what questions are coming in, and then hopefully be able to direct them to the appropriate presenter. So Ron, first question, do most manufacturers keep phosphorus out of fertilizer? He bets a lot of people would just pick what is on the shelf at Walmart or Lowe's and do not know what they're putting on necessarily. So Caroline, do you know if there are in-store fertilizers that people can buy that do carry in them?
Yeah, so do you mind if I go back a few slides? Is that going to drive everybody crazy?
No, go ahead.
Just for a visual,
No,
just
that's
give me
great.
1 second. Because I had so much to cover and I didn't want to bog down. But if you see on the slide, there's lawn fertilizer and you have those numbers there, 12, 0, 15 here. So those numbers are how you can tell if you've got phosphorus in your fertilizer. You will find these numbers on any fertilizer that you buy. It's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK. So what you're looking for is that 0 in the middle. We don't all buy lawn fertilizers. The lawn fertilizers should not have phosphorus in them if they're for established lawns, but you can always check. If that middle number is 0, you're all set. If it's at like 0.5, it's still legal. I think 0.65. So this is a percentage of the fertilizer, of that nutrient that is in the fertilizer. So in this bag, it's 12% nitrogen, 0% phosphorus, and 15% potassium. This is a whole nother class in itself, is how to read fertilizer and apply it. And in fact, we do like a 2-hour training with our master gardeners on this. And so if anyone wants to call the office, if they have questions on fertilizer, I'm also happy to answer them there. But sorry, I just want to show the visual with that.
No, yeah, perfect. So, but it does sound like then we as consumers could potentially find fertilizer in stores that have phosphorus in them. So we should be aware of that and look for the 0.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Jane and Buck, they're very interested in the bee lawns, and I have to say I am too. So I wonder if you could, maybe just talk about some of the native species that you recommend for someone who was interested in a bee lawn or a portion of a bee lawn.
Well, so I think there are a ton of native species, and it really depends on what bees. Just simply by adding clover to your lawn. Clover is an excellent source of food for bees. There's a small plant called prunella that you can add, Prunella vulgaris, that's very low growing and is excellent for bees. There are pretty much anything violets. Believe it or not, there are several native solitary bee species that are violet specialists. So by leaving those patches of violets, mowing high enough, just even, you don't have to even put in a bee lawn, just mow high enough that you're avoiding the flowers. Let your dandelions go to flower and then mow them immediately afterwards if they're going to drive you crazy. I like a few flowers in my lawn. I see a lot of interesting things in my lawn because I leave those flowers and we go out and we look and we see what's feeding on the grass. They recommend with a bee lawn also you want to mow every other week to every 2 weeks. You don't want to leave it longer than that because actually the grass will start to outcompete your flowering plants at that point. So I hope that's helpful. I'm happy to come back and do a full 45 minutes on bee lawns. I think I could talk for hours. I'm an entomologist by training, and that's one of my favorite subjects.
Well, I think your contact information and your office is actually a resource for anybody who's interested in calling and learning more. And perhaps, if there is interest there, we'd be happy to host, another one just about bee lawns. And I think people would be interested in that. So we can talk about it.
Actually, if you don't mind me stopping sharing so I can see faces, is that all right?
Sure.
And then I can also put in the chat, I've got a link for a sign up. So if anyone's interested in lawn maintenance and kind of ecological lawns and bee lawns, they can just go to this registration page, put in your phone number and name, and I'll email you materials. I figured that might be a little easier.
That would be great. Yeah, that would be great. So next question from Jim. I read that much of the land that is now the Finger Lakes National Forest is reclaimed depleted farmland from many years ago. Do either of you have any info on that?
I don't. I've heard of it, but I've never read anything on it.
Yep, there was, so I don't know that much about it, but I do know that the Northeast was, I live on Seneca Lake. The bluff was grapes all the way down to the lake. So much of our forest is young forest in our area, and much of it is reclaimed forest land. Even on our own farm, we'll go through and we'll still see old fencing from where it was fields and livestock. My husband's the 6th generation on his farm, and you can really track the history of the farm that way.
Ron's next question. So do you recommend not weeding a vegetable garden? I think perhaps, Ron, if you want to come live, maybe that was a comment or a question for someone else that was commenting in the chat box. Is that right?
I'm hearing about diversity in soil, and I don't really have a green thumb. I've got a black thumb. So I didn't know whether, I had been, weeding my vegetable garden. Is that a good practice, or should I let weeds grow, low growth weeds, or what does anybody have any thought on that to help my garden in terms of, soil health?
So that's really interesting. Do you mind if I take this really quick and then Heather, take your take on it? So weeds some other plants are fine. But how we define a weed is when it is in competition with something we want to grow. So just because a plant is there doesn't make it a weed. I would argue in a vegetable garden, those plants are going to compete with your vegetables. Vegetables really are like the thoroughbreds of the plant world. We need them like jumping out of the gate, growing as fast as they can, just so we can get whatever in our short season. Mm-hmm. What I recommend is mulching. So I mulch very heavily in my vegetable garden, especially with transplants. I do newspaper and then I do straw over that. And that prevents weeds up along the plants. But then I always have some diversity on the edges of my garden, as I'll put it that way. It's the nice way of the places I don't weed. And some flowering plants around the edges, whether or not you planted them, are very helpful for pulling pollinators into your garden and aren't going to hurt your main plants. Does that make sense? I'd take the weeds out. Yeah, you do want to weed your carrots and keep things fairly, give them a fighting chance. But
yeah, I'll piggyback off of that. I was going to say the very similar thing. Fight your battles. If it's corn and it's the grass that's the weed, yeah, you may not need to weed it. You'll probably be okay. But I heavily mulch just like Carolyn does, and I tell a lot of people You can even do something as simple as save your pizza boxes because they're kind of lengthy if you have it, and you can plot them down in between your rows, and that really helps suppress the weeds, and then you don't have to pick the weeds.
I'm constantly battling ground ivy, those viney ground ivy, and so I assume those should be pulled. Do you think?
If you do your solid best pulling them before you really plant the garden and then mulch over, that really will control them quite well. They
Okay,
need that
thank you.
light. They like a lot of light.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Jane and Buck are asking, is the 3 brown to 1 green as far as composting goes by weight of volume?
You could do weight, but it's usually just mostly a visual, just visually looking at what you have. Don't make it too hard on yourself. If you notice your pile's a little wet, add more browns. If you notice that it's a little dry, you might have to hose it down if it's a dry year type of thing.
Heather, I have a question for you. I've heard I compost in my backyard. We have like a wooded area that doesn't bother anybody. We just throw it all back there into a pile that's sort of contained, not always, but sometimes. But I wonder about kitchen scraps and meats in particular. I mean, I am aware that most people compost just, their veggies and fruits and those types of things. But I've also heard, people mention composting meats. Can you tell us anything about that, or how a homeowner might compost meats?
Usually kind of as a rule of thumb, they suggest not to do like meats or dairies or, fats or things like that, because they will attract pests. If you're a rigorous composter and you're going to be out there really working it, you could probably compost some of that stuff. But there's just kind of a rule of thumb. You really want to keep everything tucked in the middle of the pile where it's going to get hot, and keep the outside your brown so the smell's kind of at bay. It'll keep, animals away from it. But you'll be really hard to break any bones down or any shells from any seafood or anything like that. A backyard compost really probably won't get hot enough to break that stuff down unless you're really out there messing with it and agitating it and all that.
Okay.
But it can be done. Like if you have a little bit of meat, I let my kids, not necessarily meat, but sometimes some dairy and stuff in our backyard one that they manage. And we just really make sure everything's tucked into the middle, and that tends to help.
Okay, good tips. Maria Hudson is just mentioning that a regular lawnmower could be a mulching mower just by changing the type of blade. So I'm just letting everybody hear from Maria there.
and that really does help break down those bits a little bit more efficiently.
Okay. I do also, Caroline, you put the link for the, let's see, ecological lawn management in the chat. Thank you for doing that. And I'm happy to send out any additional resources to the group afterward. With this has been recorded, and so we'll send an email out to a bunch of people with additional resources, both Heather and Caroline's contact information. I'm interested in the pH test. I've never tested my lawn soil, and we've got some bare spots to contend with. So I think I'll be getting in touch with you too, Caroline. Okay, and then Larry is asking, can I just bury my organic matter in my garden soil, then rototill in the spring? And I've seen YouTube videos of people doing this, banana peels and things right into their soil. So what do you think about that, Heather?
I think it can be done, but I don't know the real. I can't say like food scraps and stuff. I've done it directly in. We used to till all of our garden right into itself, but we're trying to do the no-till with our garden right now as a new hobby type practice. So you can, I think, right, Carolyn? Like, what? I mean, you were the CSA vegetable gardener. What would you suggest?
All right, so I have, this is a subject I have big feelings on. I'm apologizing ahead of time.
Do it. We need your information.
So I think, yeah, I know people who bury their organic matter right in their garden soil. I know I have another technique for you, which is something else another thing I could spend 2 hours talking about, is the idea of sheet mulching. And that's where actually you spread your organic matter of an area and then you cover it with a brown like straw or shredded newspaper. And you keep layering and you're almost building compost. It's also called lasagna gardening. And it's a way of building compost on top of your soil. And the benefit with this is that if you look at how a plant grows, and if you look at a forest, nobody ever tills a forest. Nobody ever tills a meadow. The nutrients come from the surface and they go down. And so plants have evolved with their sort of feeder roots up kind of towards the top. And when you mix everything together, it looks really nice, but it's not actually how plants absorb nutrients as easily. So by doing this no-till technique where you're kind of building your nutrients on the top, your plants actually really like that really well. and it's a lot easier on your back. And you maintain that soil structure. Every time you use a rototill in your garden, you're breaking down all those connections that, you know, Heather was talking about. You're breaking down the tunnels from the worms. You're breaking down a lot of those things that we want in soil. So I'm not saying never rototill, but I would use it really judiciously, like maybe when you're establishing a new garden once to kind of deal with some of the weeds. But I've had really good luck with sheet mulching in my own personal garden.
Perfect.
So Heather or Caroline, how, for someone who does have compacted soils, you know, I have a garden but my lawn has been established for many, many years, and my neighbors' lawns, none of us have any trees in the lawns. It's quite horrific. But with the compost that we have in our backyard, if we wanted to, you know, incorporate that into a compacted type soil, is there another option besides tilling that you?
Are you thinking in the garden or on your lawn?
Probably, well, in the garden. We're growing a garden, and removing some of the lawn. So really it would be essentially a new garden with, you know, the soil that is already in place.
So I'll take a quick stab and then I'm going to let Heather answer this. I have found that soil will, and this is going to sound a little bit out there, but soil likes to heal itself. Soil, you know, the soil will, when you're adding organic matter to it, when you're letting it rest, compaction will reduce. That's what I've personally found. And that's why I've really gotten into this whole mulching thing, because you're bringing up those worms through the soil and those really do help. There are also cover crops you can use to help break that up. Tillage radish is a really popular one. It's actually a variety of daikon radish. It can grow 3 feet long. It has these huge roots and it really breaks up that hard pan layer. So I think that's a great option for somebody who has a really compacted area. But I don't know, Heather, you want to take it over now? Sorry, I had to.
I agree with you on that. Kind of just going with the no-till, breaking up the soil and agitating it. And I'm taught through, you know, composting workshops, it's good to just, you can aerate the soil a little bit, but just putting a thin layer of compost or however much you feel you need and letting the rain and nature do its work, it will work its way down into your soil, which will eventually make your soil become the humus, you know, workable soil you need. It won't be as compacted. It's just a longer process. Carolyn saying planting something with roots that are going to help, you know, get things moving for you is, you know, a better probably process time-wise for sure. But I'm a firm believer of just putting the compost soil on, or even putting it on the sides of your garden or your lawn and kind of just slowly working it in. And just letting the rain do the work and the wind and nature.
Okay, thank you, both of you. That is all of the questions or comments that we have in the chat. If there's anybody else that wants to come on live and ask any questions, feel free to do so. But, you know, to wrap up, you know, obviously great presentations by Caroline and Heather. Thank you so much, both of you. And, you know, I think it sounds like there's a couple other topics of interest in this, you know, with this group, but I'm happy to share resources. If there's anything that you feel you might have missed and you want to share with me, I can certainly share with this group. But thank you so much for joining us, everybody. And thanks to our presenters for some great information.
Thank you so much for having us. This was really fun.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Have a great spring, everybody. Thanks.
You too.